Ava McMillan was a devoted single mother trying to rebuild her life when she met Troy Delgado, a charming stranger with a dark past. What began as a whirlwind romance quickly spiraled into a deadly web of lies, drugs, and betrayal. By the time she uncovered the truth, it was already too late. This is the harrowing story of how a secret affair ended in a double tragedy no one saw coming. Ava Morgan lived in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Charleston, South Carolina. Her house was a simple one-story structure, with a fading white picket fence and a small garden in the front yard that she tried to maintain despite her busy schedule. To most people, she was just another single mother trying to get by. Someone who went unnoticed in the larger current of daily life. She kept things simple. No flashy clothes, no loud music, no unnecessary drama. Every morning, she would wake up early, get her 10-year-old son Liam ready for school, and then head off to her job at the dental clinic where she worked as an assistant. Her co-workers liked her. She was polite, dependable, and always got the job done without complaints. But no one ever really got close to Ava, and she never invited anyone into her personal life. Her son was the center of her world. Liam was bright, polite, and well-behaved, often praised by his teachers for his curiosity and good manners. Ava did everything she could to give him a normal, stable life. She was the kind of mother who showed up to every parent-teacher meeting, always made sure he had a lunch packed, and sat with him every evening to help with his homework. But what people didn't see was the growing mountain of problems she kept hidden behind her careful routines. Ava was struggling financially in ways no one imagined. After her divorce 5 years earlier, she had relied heavily on credit cards to make ends meet. The child support from her ex-husband had stopped abruptly, and despite repeated attempts to locate him, he had seemingly vanished. She was left to carry the full weight of raising a child alone while juggling rent, bills, groceries, and unexpected emergencies. She had taken on a second job bartending in a downtown club, working late into the night and returning home just in time to nap before starting the day all over again. The exhaustion wore on her, but she refused to complain. Despite her efforts, the debt kept climbing. Collection notices were arriving more frequently. Her landlord had given her a final warning. She was running out of options. Ava had looked into government aid programs, but most either denied her application or required months of processing time she didn't have. She couldn't bear the idea of uprooting Liam, pulling him out of school, and starting over somewhere unfamiliar. So she did what she always did, kept going, silently, and hoped things would somehow get better. Even with all the stress, Ava made sure her son never sensed how bad things had become. Liam still had his birthday parties, weekend walks in the park, and movie nights at home. He had no idea that their electricity had been shut off for 2 days in the middle of August, or that the groceries in their kitchen had been bought with Ava's last available credit. Ava had mastered the art of hiding fear behind a smile. At night, when Liam was asleep, Ava would sit alone in the kitchen, staring at the pile of bills and wondering what would happen if she simply disappeared. She never acted on those thoughts, but they lingered in the back of her mind like shadows. There was a heaviness in her chest that never quite went away, a tight, silent anxiety that kept her awake even after the long hours of work. In those moments of quiet despair, Ava began to feel an unfamiliar urge, something in her heart that whispered she needed more than this, more than the endless struggle, more than survival. She wanted to feel alive again, to experience something that didn't come with sacrifice or fear. She wasn't looking for love, but perhaps a distraction, something or someone who could make her forget, even for a little while, just how heavy the weight of her life had become. And that's when he walked in. Troy Callahan entered Ava's life like a storm she never saw coming. It was a humid Friday night when he first walked into the dimly lit bar where Ava worked her second job. She had just finished serving a group of college kids when she noticed him sitting alone at the far end of the counter. Unlike the usual loud and flashy crowd, Troy was calm, composed, and sharply dressed. His confidence wasn't arrogant, just practiced. Like someone who had spent years perfecting how to be noticed without appearing to try. He watched the room with sharp eyes, but when his gaze landed on Ava, it lingered just long enough to make her uneasy and curious. He started showing up every few nights. He always sat in the same stool and ordered the same drink. At first, their conversations were brief and superficial. Polite smiles, a few questions, the occasional joke. But Troy had a way of listening that made Ava feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. He asked about her day, about her son, about her dreams. When she hesitated or deflected, he didn't press. He simply waited, always calm, always patient. Eventually, she let her guard down. Troy told her he owned a string of auto body shops between South Carolina and Georgia. He claimed he had grown up poor, just like her, and had worked his way up from nothing. His story was full of hardship, perseverance, and just enough vulnerability to make it believable. Ava found herself confiding in him, telling him about her debt, her ex-husband, the way she felt like she was sinking. Troy never judged. Instead, he offered reassurance. He told her she deserved more, and in her fragile state, she believed him. The relationship escalated quickly. Within weeks, Ava was spending nights at his place. A sleek apartment on the edge of town with no signs of personal history. No photos, no mail, no clutter. Everything looked staged. But Ava didn't question it. She was too caught up in the thrill of being wanted. For the first time in years, someone treated her like she mattered, and it felt intoxicating. But there were red flags, if only she had chosen to see them. Troy never talked about friends or family. He never answered calls in front of her. When he disappeared for days without explanation, he always returned with a gift or a romantic excuse that made her forget to ask questions. He didn't want her visiting his workplace, claiming it was too rough for her. He asked a lot of questions about her finances, her schedule, even her ex-husband. He never asked about Liam. Behind Troy's charm was a very different man. In reality, he was no business owner. Troy had been in and out of prison under different names and had a record that spanned multiple states. Charges included assault, identity theft, illegal possession of weapons, and suspected involvement in drug distribution. He had been careful to keep himself out of prison long enough to start over under a new alias. He had no permanent residence, no real job, and no legal income. His entire life was a performance. What made Troy dangerous wasn't just his criminal background. It was how easily he could slip into people's lives and become whatever they needed. For Ava, he became a savior. For others before her, he had played the role of protector, investor, even mentor. But the endings were always the same: lies, betrayal, and destruction. As their relationship deepened, Troy began isolating Ava from others. He told her that her co-workers didn't care about her, that her family didn't understand what she was going through. He convinced her to quit her job at the dental clinic, promising he would take care of her. For the first time, she stopped bartending. Her days were suddenly free, but her world had shrunk to just one man. Friends who tried to check in were met with vague excuses or silence. Ava wasn't just falling for Troy, she was disappearing into him, and the more she gave up, the harder it became to see how far she had strayed from the life she once knew. By the time she realized how tightly his grip had become, it was already too late. Ava's life began to unravel slowly, almost quietly, as if the destruction were creeping in under the cover of comfort. At first, it felt like freedom. No more double shifts, no more exhausted mornings and unpaid bills piling on the kitchen table. Troy gave her cash, no strings attached, at least not at the beginning. He told her to rest, to breathe, to live. He said she had earned it, and after everything she had endured, Ava allowed herself to believe him. But with each passing day, her dependence on him grew. Without a job or steady income of her own, Ava started to feel the quiet sting of powerlessness. She didn't say anything at first, but small cracks began to form in the picture-perfect fantasy. Troy's cash became irregular. Sometimes he would hand her a few $100s. Other times, he would vanish for days without warning, only to return with vague stories about business meetings out of town. He would flash wads of cash, sometimes even rolls of $100 bills, but never said where they came from. Then came the packages. Unmarked boxes left at the doorstep, always late at night. Troy told her not to open them. He would pick them up without explanation and leave in a hurry. Ava peeked inside one of the boxes when he was gone. It was filled with burner phones, rolled-up stacks of cash, and Ziploc bags of pills. She shut the box and pushed it back to its spot, her hands shaking. That night, she told herself she must have imagined it. Troy's tone had started changing. He was still affectionate, still kissed her forehead and told her he loved her. But there was a tension in his voice when she asked questions. One night, he grabbed her wrist too hard during an argument over a missed phone call. He apologized, begged for forgiveness, and said it would never happen again. But Ava had seen the flash in his eyes, the same cold edge she used to see in her ex-husband when he was about to spiral. Still, she said nothing. She had nowhere else to go. No job, no savings, no fallback. Liam still thought everything was fine. She made sure he never saw the cracks. She still helped him with homework, still packed his lunch, still smiled during dinner. But inside, Ava was unraveling. Her stomach clenched every time Troy's car pulled into the driveway. Her nights were restless, and the fear was slowly replacing every trace of the comfort she once felt. One morning, after Troy had left unusually early, Ava got a knock on her door. It was subtle, just 3 quiet taps. When she opened it, there were 2 men in plain clothes holding badges, DEA agents. They asked if Troy was home. They showed her pictures, surveillance stills, of Troy in what looked like a drug lab, another one showing him exchanging money with men in a warehouse. They told her that Troy wasn't who he said he was. His real name was Mason Beck. He had pending warrants in multiple states and was under federal investigation. They told her she and her son could be in danger. Ava froze. Her hands went cold. The officers asked if she had seen anything suspicious. She wanted to tell them everything, about the boxes, the cash, the phone calls, the lies. But her throat locked. All she could manage was a shake of her head and a whisper that she didn't know anything. They gave her a card and told her to call if she changed her mind. When the door closed, Ava stood silently in the hallway, her heart pounding so loud she thought it might wake Liam. She walked to the kitchen and stared at the pile of unopened bills still sitting on the counter, as if time had never moved. She thought of the job she had quit, the people she had pushed away, and the life she had handed over to a man she barely knew. Troy returned that evening, all charm and smiles, tossing his keys on the table and wrapping his arms around her like nothing had changed. But Ava's arms didn't move. She stood still, eyes blank, mind spinning. She was no longer safe, and deep down she knew her silence was no longer an option. Something had shifted, and there would be no going back. Ava lay awake long after the house had gone still. The rhythmic ticking of the kitchen clock felt louder than usual, matching the pulsing beat of her heart. She stared at the ceiling, her thoughts heavy and tangled. Something had to change. The DEA agent's visit had shaken her deeply. It wasn't just about Troy anymore. It was about Liam, about their safety, their future. She had allowed herself to get swept into a lie, one she now realized could come crashing down at any moment. She had to get out. But the idea of leaving Troy felt like trying to escape a shadow. No matter where she turned, he was there. She began planning in secret. She reconnected with a former co-worker, a woman named Dana, who had always been kind to her. Dana was hesitant at first, unsure of what Ava wanted after cutting ties so abruptly. But Ava kept the conversation vague, only asking if she knew anyone who might be hiring. She mentioned needing part-time work, something low profile. Dana agreed to ask around. Ava didn't dare go into details. Not yet. She feared that if she said the wrong thing to the wrong person, it would all blow up in her face. Over the next few days, Ava started hiding small amounts of cash from Troy. $10 here, 20 there, whatever she could skim from what he gave her. She tucked it away in the lining of an old purse buried deep in the back of her closet. She also began packing a small bag, just the essentials for her and Liam, in case they had to leave in a hurry. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was a start. She didn't want to run. She wanted to do it right, to gather evidence and hand it over to the DEA, but time wasn't on her side. Troy had grown more erratic. His disappearances became longer. He came home smelling of gasoline and sweat, his moods darker and harder to read. He became possessive. He began checking her phone, asking where she went when he wasn't home, and accusing her of hiding things. Ava played along, pretending nothing had changed, but inside her fear hardened into resolve. She had to act before he turned violent. Then, one night, everything unraveled faster than she could have imagined. Troy came home in a panic. He locked every door, pulled the blinds shut, and shut off his phone. He paced the house with a gun in his waistband, muttering about someone snitching and how it was all falling apart. Ava tried to remain calm, but her hands trembled as she made dinner, forcing herself to smile in front of Liam. She didn't know what Troy had done or who was after him, but she knew this wasn't a man with control anymore. He was spiraling, and she and her son were caught in the middle. Later that night, once Liam was asleep, Troy began ranting. He accused Ava of talking to the police, of letting someone into the house. He demanded to see her phone. She handed it over without protest, watching his eyes flick across the screen with suspicion. She had deleted her messages to Dana, cleared her call logs, wiped anything that might raise a red flag. He didn't find anything, but that didn't calm him. Instead, he grew angrier, throwing the phone across the room and slamming his fist into the wall. Ava froze, her body paralyzed. She realized then that she might not survive another outburst. The next morning, before Troy woke, Ava made a decision. She packed the bag she had hidden in the closet, gently woke Liam, and told him they were going on a surprise trip. She left a note on the kitchen counter. Simple, direct. "I'm sorry, I had to do what's best for my son. Don't follow us." Then she got in her car and drove. Nowhere in particular, just away. But she never made it out of town. At a stoplight 3 blocks from her house, another car pulled up behind her, then blocked her from the front. Before she could react, 2 men jumped out, one yanking open her door, the other grabbing Liam from the back seat. Ava screamed and fought, but she was outnumbered and outmatched. The last thing she saw was Troy stepping out of the passenger seat of the second car, calm as ever, shaking his head in disappointment. Everything had just gone from dangerous to deadly. The air inside the warehouse was thick and stale, the kind of place that swallowed sound and trapped fear like smoke. Ava sat bound to a chair, her wrists raw from the rough cord cutting into her skin. Her vision was blurry, not from tears but from exhaustion. She had lost track of time. There were no windows, only a single flickering bulb overhead that buzzed in an almost mocking rhythm. Somewhere nearby she could hear Liam whimpering. That sound, more than anything, shattered her. Troy paced in front of her, arms crossed, lips pressed into a flat, angry line. The man who once brought her flowers and held her like she was his world now looked like a stranger. There was no warmth left in his eyes, only a cold calculation. He hadn't said much since they brought her there. He didn't need to. The silence said it all. She had betrayed him, and he was deciding what to do with her. He finally spoke, asking questions she didn't answer. Who had she talked to? Who had she given information to? Why did she run? Ava could see it in his face. He already knew the truth. The DEA agents, her search for a way out, the money she had stashed. It wasn't about the answers anymore. It was about control. He had lost grip on his world, and now he was tightening his hold on her to compensate. Ava pleaded to see Liam. That was all she wanted, just a glimpse, just to know he was okay. Troy hesitated. Then, with a nod to one of his men, the door opened and her son was brought in, eyes wide with confusion and fear. He ran to her, and she held him as best she could, despite the restraints. For a brief moment, Ava found clarity. She had to survive, not for herself, but for him. Later that night, the tides shifted. Troy left the warehouse, apparently to meet with someone. The moment the heavy metal door clanged shut behind him, Ava noticed one of the men guarding her. Someone she vaguely recognized from a night Troy had thrown a party at their house. He was younger than the others, maybe no older than 22. He looked uncertain, fidgeting, uncomfortable. Ava spoke softly to him, carefully, not begging, not manipulating, just honest words about her son, about wanting to live, about how things had gone too far. She didn't ask him to untie her, she just made him see her as a mother, not a threat. That sliver of humanity was enough. Hours later, when the others were distracted, he left the door unlocked. Ava didn't wait. She grabbed Liam, who had been sleeping on a dusty blanket in the corner, and slipped through the door into the night. They ran, hearts pounding, lungs burning, through alleyways and deserted streets. She didn't know where she was or how far they had to go, but anything was better than staying. By morning, they reached a gas station on the outskirts of town. She used the payphone to call the DEA agent whose card she had kept hidden in her shoe. Within minutes, black SUVs arrived, sirens off, agents flooding the area. Ava collapsed into their arms, sobbing, holding Liam close. She gave them everything, names, locations, details. She didn't leave anything out. The raid happened later that same day. The warehouse was stormed and most of Troy's men were arrested. But Troy himself was gone. He had vanished before the agents arrived, leaving behind only his phone and a trail of empty bullet casings. The manhunt that followed stretched for weeks, but there was no sign of him. Some believed he had skipped the country. Others thought he might have been killed by rivals. The truth remained a mystery. In the end, Ava and Liam were relocated under witness protection. A new name, a new city, a second chance. But the scars didn't vanish. Ava lived with the fear that Troy might one day return, a ghost from the past lurking in the shadows. Still, she pressed forward. She found a job, enrolled Liam in school, and built a life from the ashes. The double tragedy was clear. Ava had lost everything: her home, her peace, her trust. And Liam had lost his innocence far too early. But they had survived, and sometimes survival is the greatest revenge of all.